Great. Andy, Bill, thank you so much for that very interesting, provocative presentation. There's a lot to think about, a lot of information. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I want to build off something. You said something there that was really interesting. Comfort and control as it relates to supply chain. It's a very interesting concept. And also referring to President Biden's 100-day report, building resilient supply chain. In that report, there is discussion about developing U.S.-based supply chain for anywhere between 50 and 100 critical medicines. This is also something that you touched on. As I read about this in the literature, it comes back to what is really meant by that. And I'd love to get both of your opinions on that. Is it to achieve that comfort in control? Is it about, hey, we're gonna make a completely domestic supply chain as far back as we can go for starting materials and intermediates all the way to the API? Or is it, case by case basis, it's maybe, in a targeted way, backfilling or supplementing existing supply chains? How do you see that really taking shape? What's really going to be what should be the end result of this?
Sure, I can start off, and then I'd love for Bill to step in. So Phlow was really stood up by a government grant. So we got a large BARDA grant specifically to bring U.S. manufacturing back for these essential medicines. And it's really, I mean, when you look at some of the tragedies where there are neonates dying in U.S. hospitals because that hospital didn't have access to that medicine, it just doesn't make any sense. Something has to change, right? And so, when COVID hit, and huge influx of patients that need to be intubated, these standard essential medicines should be available, and hospitals were having trouble getting it, right? So the U.S. government, really needed to be looking at this as a national emergency, as a national security risk, right? Because you have foreign powers full control over that supply chain, right? So they provided some funds for us to develop an end-to-end solution, partner with Medicines for All, partner with AMPAC Fine Chemicals, partner with Civica, build our own facilities, and start knocking off these essential medicines where we can make these costs competitively. And we will be doing that using continuous manufacturing. So we work with the government to identify, a dozen and a half high-profile medicines that would be the typical things that the EMTs would have on some acute care setting at an accident, or the hospitals and emergency rooms would need. So we identified, based on an algorithm that was based on whether or not it's needed for COVID, whether or not it's a medical countermeasure for our armed forces, whether or not it's in shortage currently, whether or not it's on a shortage list. So a variety of factors bubbled these essential medicines up, and then it turned out a couple months later, there was an essential medicines list published that has a lot of things that would surprise the daylights out of everyone. Saline bags, they're in chronic shortage. Saline bags. I mean, I actually had no idea. So, there's a recognition by the government. They provided some initial funds for that, and hopefully some continuing funds and incentives, and really to bring, it's not just Phlow, it's funding other companies as well. Continuous is the one that's received a nice influx of capital to help knock some of these drugs off the shortage list. And so we feel fortunate to have that support, and we feel fortunate partnering with a company like AMPAC Fine Chemicals or SK pharmteco on this. And so I'm going to look for Bill's comments.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, before you start, I just wanted to comment on something, Andrew. It feels like then, no matter what, to have a domestic supply chain, whether or not there are other sources, great. But if nothing else, there's a viable, active I guess, reasonably cost competitive supply based in the U.S., right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And as Bill pointed out, all countries kind of have to look out for themselves. I mean, India was doing it for their own population. So the US government needs to be thinking about this. Manufacturers, companies need to be thinking about this as well.
Right. Bill?
Yeah, so I mean, these drugs that Andy's talking about, these are essential medicines. These are not your lifestyle drugs or other large volume drugs. And so what the U.S. government is really doing is they're trying to focus on what's going on in hospitals where people are in critical care and they need these kind of drugs to survive. And so it's not a huge number of drugs, but so that is our initial focus, and that's what we're working on. So I think we've pretty much solved that end game, in that we know we can manufacture and formulate these APIs in the United States. That's not a problem, and we've already demonstrated that. It's okay, where do we get all of our raw materials from that we're going to do to manufacture these APIs? And it's a problem, because in the U.S. a lot of the raw materials in the key commodity raw materials have left the country because of competition. And so it's really trying to develop that back and to develop preferred partners that we can work with to bring back key starting materials to the United States. It's an interesting challenge. I mean, it's gone away over the last year.
Yeah. When people talk about chronic shortages, and it comes up a lot, drug shortages, not in the specific context of essential medicines, perhaps, but it's been coming up throughout the last decade or so. It's always linked to, or it seems commonly linked to, the idea, hey, just what you said, these are low volume drugs, small volume API, pricing is very low. There's something about the price point, and companies exit because it's not worth their while, right? So if we kind of carry that forward and you say, okay, well, advanced technology certainly can make an impact. Smart process development, advanced continuous manufacturing can really make a dent in that. But is there really then remaining a price component where you say, look, we can help, we can do the best we can, but at the end of the day, there is going to be an extra price involved there. How do you see that? I mean, is that a real component of this? And is it, the healthcare system has to simply face that, look, in order to keep this domestic supply chain robust and intact, there is going to be a premium, or is it something else?
Bill, would you like to start on this one, and then I can follow up?
Yeah, sure. So I think there has to be a premium there, but it can't be a huge premium. And the premium that you're paying for should be a premium for a higher quality, for higher environmental control, for low risk, mitigating. You're not going to have a shortage. It's going to be things like that. So we're not talking about having your formulated drugs being 2x what they are when we get them from India and China, but you got to look at like that whole supply chain. What Andy talked about in his early slide. It's you got the key starting materials all the way to the APIs, and you got the formulated product, and then you got all of these distributors in between the hospitals and the patients that add just costs. And so fixing that, that's one of the things that Civica has done a really good job, because once they formulate, they go directly to the hospitals, and it cuts out a lot of that extra cost. Andy?
Yeah, so yes, there probably needs to be some premium, but I think a lot of it is awareness, right? So as you pull back that curtain on how the sausage is made, right? Things like the China RX book that Rosemary wrote, and the other book, Bottle Lies, really kind of exposes some things that go on that people don't really want to know. And if they knew about it, they might pay attention, right? We've heard about counterfeit drugs, right? And so for some drugs, a counterfeit drug that might be adulterated or might not have the same potency, Okay, that might not be a big deal, but can you imagine being on warfarin or something like that, that you have to have exquisite titration of that? That's life-threatening to be,
Yeah.
to not have the right dose. Or in the supply chain, all of a sudden there's melamine in dog food, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we need to have awareness about how our supply chains, well, we just need to have awareness on supply chains, and having more control and reliability really helps. To be honest with you, we believe that one of the benefits of U.S. manufacturing is that reliability. And when we talk to large GX companies or children's hospitals, which we are partnering with at Phlow, they bemoan the fact that their pharmacy directors are having trouble getting this particular drug, right? They don't know when they're going to get it. They don't know when these things are going to be in shortage. If we have a supply chain and manufacturing in the U.S., we could say we'll give you 5 years supply, right? Because we have control. So I think there is certainly elements of the supply chain that we need to recognize and bring forward with some visibility and awareness that would really help. But to Bill's point, I believe that if the government can help with that incentive or be allowed to have a little bit of premium, then that can bring manufacturing back, right? So if you incentivize and say, let's say, for example, that the DoD, they have to buy by first intent a drug that is certain percentage manufactured in the US over something else if it's within a certain price point,
right?
That might bring some manufacturing back.
So it feels like, look, in the end there is a premium, but it's not because of inefficiency. It's actually the full value of having that robust local supply chain. It's having that environmental consciousness about how the drug is being manufactured. There's no cutting corners and so on. It's that responsible element of it. And to get things going, there is going to be a role for government to kind of incentivize that and move the I guess the frame of mind really from the population to understand what's at stake here.
Yeah.
Is this just as a side topic before we move on to the next question? I just wondered, it's quite a challenge to shift people's thinking on supply chain, and I know there are some professionals in the audience that are involved in supply chain consulting and management. Is it something that and you talked about these very special relationships that Phlow has to accomplish this? There's AMPAC and there's Civica. Is it a broader network of relationships? Do you find yourself working with smaller business incubators or other kinds of organizations could be from a technology point of view? Is it, how broad is that network, and is it expanding in order to be able to address this problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest with you, we are a fledgling organization. We just turned one back in May. We have a lot of people that we're just bringing on board, right? We're still less than 45 employees, but it's really amazing the response we get when we're talking to other companies. This mission really resonates. And so, our CEO, Eric Edwards, he's out there talking to a lot of folks. He's preaching this message. We're having lots and lots of conversations. So, I think we're early days, but we definitely have to be developing networks. We have to be developing or spawning some innovation in areas things that we haven't thought about. We feel like that we have a good solution for the government, right? And I haven't talked a lot about it, but we think data analytics is very important in recognizing and predicting when drug shortages will occur. So you have in place a way to mitigate that. I had it on a slide. We have this concept called the SAPIR, SAPIR, which is modeled after the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We have Strategic API Reserve. Currently, the U.S. government stockpiles medications.
Right.
That means they have to stockpile every single presentation, every dosage form. We think storing APIs which are more stable is the way to go. and
Right.
then just make sure you have a conversion strategy, right? So we think there are better ways to do this, but yeah, we definitely, you know, would love to have people come to us and say, we've got ideas on how to help solve this problem. We love the fact that AMPAC is one of those.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of great conversations that are going on, and as time goes on and you start to, you know, continue with the visibility that you have and the high profile announcements that have come out, that'll lead to even a greater number of discussions. I wanted to return to something that you mentioned earlier in your presentation about supply chain, and you know, we were talking about cost and price, and you know, to what extent things should be done in the U.S. versus overseas, and that whole topic. But there was something that comes up also in the 100-day report about capacity, just pure raw capacity. And you know, coming from the industry, it's like you really want you don't want a lot of capacity. You want to run your plants lean and drive profitability. But how significant is that? How significant is the capacity shortage in being able to fulfill the vision of, you know, a significant amount of essential medicines or other medicines being manufactured domestically? Can you comment on that? Is it, you know, massive building of facilities, or how do you see that playing out?
I think that's a great question for Bill to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that Phlow is doing is they're building a manufacturing facility on our property. So, you know, we'll be running this building in conjunction with our other buildings. And so we have not reached a capacity constraint with that building. And if, you know, if it does come to that, we can start to build another one. But we've also got the surge capacity of all the AMPAC facilities throughout the U.S. I mean, we've got a lot of capacity in our 3 sites.
But do you think there's, you know, is it like a widespread problem, a shortage of capacity, or is it, you know, a little bit more targeted? It can be addressed, you know, with existing companies. I'm trying to get a feel for how big the issue is of capacity.
I think the API capacity in the U.S. is sufficient for what we need to do. I think one of the biggest problems is, where do we get our raw materials from? And that's something we continually struggle with. Yeah.
But does that lead then to your thought of, okay, then we need to start building facilities to do that? I mean, do we need, you know, different kinds of plants to do the raw materials across the U.S.? Is that where you see that going?
Exactly. And that's something that we have been discussing with Phlow a lot recently.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I think it's probably also good to mention for those in the audience that may not be aware of it, that in the use of continuous manufacturing, that is a significant, should have a significant difference in the footprint, right? In the infrastructure cost to create plants. Yeah?
Yes.
Yes and no. I think with continuous, just give me 2 seconds and I'll hand it over to you, Andy. So I think with continuous, your footprint is bigger, but it takes a little bit longer to develop it. We're working on strategies where we can keep our CapEx down. But, you know, by using continuous processing and not having to take so many in-process samples and, you know, holding the plant while you're waiting for QC to give you results, a lot of those things which build in time in the plant, and you can make the product a lot faster and quicker. I'm sorry, Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, and one of our facilities, even though it's really a small scale, is we don't really have a single dedicated fixed reactor, right? Wow. We have space for modular continuous skids that we will use, right? And so you might think, well, that, you know, I mean, that's not a huge expense. Now, that's on a particular scale. As you go up in scale, you might need different isolation equipment to handle certain throughput. And we also have that flow. I mean, we believe that continuous manufacturing is important, but we also have the capability to do batch manufacturing, because that will also be important. But we certainly lean heavily towards our processes and the first development projects that we have. You know, we're making great progress on converting those to continuous. I do think that the pendulum is swinging back to the U.S. for really, having a domestic source. And this is, my experience in the, in the CDMO space, in the pharma space. So, Bill was focusing on really essential medicines, but I think generally API manufacturing, I think, a lot of that's coming back. And the key, as Bill mentioned, is really in the key starter materials, because those are the ones that just, we just don't have availability. And there may need to be repurposing, refurbishing of existing facilities to help with that. That's one of the areas that I know Phlow is really interested. We think that's going to be the toughest nut to crack. And so, I think there probably needs to be expansion of the footprint in the United States for manufacturing in general, not just for essential medicines. Great, thanks.
At this stage, I want to encourage the audience to ask questions and, share comments that they have about this topic. So, the lines are open.
So it looked like there was one. Are you looking for strategies for shortening QA times?
Yeah.
I can address that. While it's not widely practiced, it's in API manufacturing, certainly for drug product, it seems to have more uptake, even though I almost question that. We would like to be able to use release by exception for our APIs. If we have exquisite control and can demonstrate that, and are using automation, we can take some of the human element out of it, and we can improve the quality, right? And we should be able to defend that to the regulatory agencies. But we would love to not have to test and then and then have all this oversight to release. So we think that's a strategy that can help bring costs down and quite frankly headcount as well.
Isn't that something related? The recent announcement with USP, is that related to this? It's developing analytical methods or more efficient analytical methods.
I'm not exactly certain what announcement you're talking about. I will say that Phlow has reached an agreement with US Pharmacopeia to be another strategic partner. They are certainly trying to push the industry forward on analytical methodology. But I'm going to leave it at that, because that's not really my area of expertise.
Okay, great. Well, look, while people are thinking of questions, there's something I wanted to ask. There was an announcement in March about Phlow forming a partnership to supply medicines to children's hospitals, which I found really fascinating. And I don't know if it's the same as this is in the context with Civica, but it feels like, given the profile of the company and your relationship with AMPAC, it feels like this is an example where a hospital it's really like almost contracting direct to the API source to address supply chain. It's like a direct connection. And so it's a really, to your point, it's a completely different way of thinking about the supply of API medicines. And just wondering now, on the basis of that, are you continuing to get now a lot of outreach from all different kinds of hospitals around the country and maybe even other parts of the world for this? Or what has that triggered?
Yeah. So, I don't think Phlow can take credit for that business model. As Bill pointed out, and I mentioned as well, Civica has really pioneered this area where they have supply chain, long-term supply chain agreements with hospitals that they will supply certain medicines. Right. And so there is a reliability of the supply for those things that Civica can provide. One of the original focuses of Eric Edwards, one of the co-founders, was really pediatric drug shortages. So this really ties very, very closely with that. So Phlow has developed a relationship with a consortium, or we call it the Children's Hospital Network. I think there's 13 that have signed up, and we are in discussions with supply chain agreements with them. And it's exactly that same model, right? So we're borrowing from Civica. we have APIs that we will convert into drug product with partners, right? And those partners will supply these children's hospitals directly with the medicines that they need.
Yeah, that's great. We've been talking. I know we're coming towards the top of the hour, and we'll transition very shortly to networking and happy hour, so to speak. But I wanted to ask. We've been talking about essential medicine shortages, but there's the broader topic of medicine. Innovative medicines, branded medicines, and how do you view the supply chain, the complexity of that segment of the industry versus, generic or essential medicines? I mean, is it the same type of inefficiencies that eventually you think you'll be able to address, or is it somehow a different system?
I think it's a different problem.
Okay.
Yeah, when you look at the brand pharmaceutical companies, they're focused on speed. They're focused on speed and quality. And so at the beginning and all the way through clinical trials and launch, cost isn't a big driver for what they're doing. It's how quickly can I get to the market and increase our stock, right?
So it's just the market. It's just a totally different model. Yeah.
So because of because of that.
Yeah. So when you
go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We want to hear from both of you, though.
So, okay. So when you look at the brand companies and them focusing on continuous processing, they don't want to spend the time or effort to do a continuous process because they want to do it as quickly as possible, which is typically batch.
I see. Andy?
Yeah. And I was going to add that because they're looking at speed to market, that supply chain is a little different, right? And so for the essential medicine space or the generic space, the supply chain has to be cost competitive. And so you really have to iron out all the inefficiencies or you'll never compete, right? And so, necessity is the mother of invention. And so we're going to have to see some innovation in this area for really the supply chain issues in this space to be solved. But I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. I think generally in the US, I think there's more appetite to have a little bit more control from big pharma and other companies for the supply chain. I think you're going to see increased need to have at least some domestic supply. It might not, it might not be the primary supplier, it might be secondary supplier, but I think you're going to see increase in that space.
Great. Well, listen, I want to thank you, Andy and Bill, for really an excellent presentation, excellent commentary. There's a lot to continue, a lot of food for thought, so to speak, and I hope that we'll be able to get into that in the networking session that follows. And I also want to thank the audience and Peter. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to again also thank our two panelists.
Peter, I think you're on mute, or I can't hear you.
I am not on mute.
Oh,
but he can hear. So I just want to thank everyone in the audience and thank the panelists and Wayne who conducted the fireside chat and the Q&A. So I want to remind you what we have is we have a networking section after this. As soon as I end this session, all of you will end up being automatically in the electronic ballroom. There is one table that's labeled DuBay and Carpenter. So if you want to have some follow-on discussions with either Andy or Bill, you can go to that table. But there's no set of rules other than enjoy meeting each other and mingling and asking some questions. So again, thank you all, and we all look forward to seeing you at our next webcast as well.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.